one of those things where even central government doesn't seem to quite understand what is going on. So honestly, we're trying to give you the best information. If it's subsequently has been changed or something else is going on, obviously we'll be sending out briefings continually to keep you up to date. Okay, that's my disclaimer. Thank you for joining us. Fraser, do you want to kick us off with a general intro, and then as quick as possible, we'll go into the questions that you've been sending in, and hopefully we can answer as many of those as possible in the hour or so that we've got.
Sure, thanks, Vaughan. Obviously, thanks for all the questions. They obviously deal with the main significant changes that have come into effect with Tier 3. So obviously the main one that everyone will be aware of, the general headline, and I suppose it's the nuances we'll get into. But the move into Tier 3 means that pubs and bars must cease operating as such, unless they're serving substantial meals. And we'll come on to what the definition of that is and how it works in practice. As well as pubs and bars, I suppose it's important to recognise that it also includes other businesses involved in selling alcohol for consumption on the premises. As well as sort of the traditional hospitality venues, the move into Tier 3 also requires some other businesses to cease operating as well. So those are casinos, betting shops, adult gaming centres and bingo halls. So all your primary gambling businesses, and they've also included soft play areas and soft play centres, but not particularly relevant for this meeting. Just to say that the long-standing restrictions on nightclubs, places like that, and sexual entertainment venues, so your lap dancing and strip club venues, the restriction on those opening also remains in place. Perhaps the other significant change is there's the restriction in respect of outdoor areas it mirrors what has to take place inside now. So that is one household or support bubble. So it's not the rule of 6 like it was in Tier 2. So I don't know, Vaughan, if you want to sort of go through the questions and we can maybe get into some of the details, and or if there's anything else.
Yeah, I think let's just work our way through the questions because I think they cover pretty well everything. So one that came up from a number of people, the most obvious one, what's considered a substantial meal? Is it breakfast? And how do you define substantial food?
Sure. So basically, you've got to cease your business unless the alcohol is served for consumption on the premises as part of a table meal. So I suppose there's 3 elements to that. It's served for consumption on the premises as part of a table meal. So a table meal is defined as a meal that you'd expect to serve as the main midday or main evening meal, or as a main course at either such a meal. And that it has to be a meal eaten by a person seated at a table or at a counter or other structure functioning as a table. So something for the, people put the food on. So for the avoidance of doubt, alcohol can only be ordered if the customer is ordering or consuming a main meal. So it doesn't sort of specifically define, exactly what a main meal is. And I suppose what we would expect is, operators to be reasonable and use common sense. I suppose that's what we'll be doing as the authority, and not seek to undermine the purpose of the restrictions. So I suppose in respect of this, if there are queries over menus or food offerings, then by all means get in touch and we can have the conversation as to what are viewpoint would be. The other thing to mention is, I suppose, relevant to hotels. So that same applies to hotels except for room service. So room service is not captured by that. So room service doesn't have to be with a meal. And I think you mentioned about breakfast. Well, looking at the definition of expected to be served as the main midday or main evening meal, or as a main course at either such a meal, I'd say that probably doesn't capture breakfast, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. But probably from conversations we had, there were a few worries about people who do tapas and small plate type services. We probably think that is included because that would be functioning as a dinner or a menu. It's not the size of the plate that's important.
No, I think, the thing is it's got to be a table meal. Now, been for tapas meals, it's well established that tapas is a meal. However, I suppose you've got to look at it in the round. One plate of tapas. No, but,
so you couldn't keep on having grilled peppers and then something else delivered, grilled mushrooms the next hour or whatever.
Yeah, and so that's why I think you've just got to have that sort of common sense approach to it.
Okay. One that's come up from a lot of people then is about timings. If you're having a meal, how long are you then allowed to stay afterwards drinking? Are there time limits on tables? I know this is all very rough and isn't in the regs, but have you got a maximum drinking allowance? How does it work between the drinking and the eating?
Yeah, I mean, there's again, you can't be definitive on things like this. I suppose the regulation is that the alcohol has to be as part of the meal. So, we've all been for meals, we're well accustomed, I suppose, to finishing your drink following your meal. It's all about what's being reasonable. Again, if you're going to be sat down, you get your drink before, and then you're taken to your table for your meal. Again, we're no time limit. That's impossible. But it's about, I suppose, using that approach of reasonableness and common sense to it, and not seeking, I suppose, to get around it. You've been for a meal. You know how drinks are typically served with that. That is what's expected, I guess.
Okay. A few others on similar things. I mean, just in terms of the technicalities, could people have a drink at a seated bar area before going in? Could they then move to a bar afterwards to have a digestif or whatever?
Yeah, so the crux is it's got to be a part of the meal. So I suppose you can't just go into a bar and be having drinks and then wait for a table to become available and then obviously transition. However, you've got your table booked, you get there shortly before, and while it's been prepared, you get a drink and then you take that drink through to the table. That's fair enough. Again, I suppose if you are going to retire to another part of the venue, again, it's got to be part of the meal. So it's going to be a case of fact and degree and the setup of the business and what's been offered. So yeah, I suppose just to apply those principles, I guess.
Okay. A couple on hotels. Can a hotel with residents only serve alcohol directly at the bar, or is it only room service? And then can the hotel bar remain open to just serve soft drinks and tea and coffee?
First part, no. I think it is, even for residents, as I see it, it's got to be with a meal, except for room service. However, in relation to, so let me just scroll back. I suppose the regulations capture a business that involves the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises. So if you change so that you're not selling alcohol for consumption on the premises, then ultimately, yeah, it's not captured by that. So if like you said, if it's just teas and coffees, then and alcohol isn't being served, then I don't think it will be captured.
And then there's a few about obviously the rules around takeaways. So whether cafes offer takeaway services around sandwiches, coffees, cake, that sort of stuff, is that still okay?
So takeaway food is, so we've obviously the 10 p.m. curfew is still in effect. So post 10 p.m. Food and drink can only be taken away from a venue if it's either delivered by the venue, if it is collected outdoors without the person going in, or via drive-through facility.
Really important one that a lot of people have brought up. Who's actually responsible for ensuring that people are eating? Is it the venue?
Yeah, I think it is really, ultimately you've got to exercise some due diligence in ensuring that you are complying with the regulations. It's a legal requirement. And so, yes, you do have to take responsibility for ensuring that, you are complying with those regulations.
And an interesting one, when you or enforcement visit, what evidence needs to be provided that venues are actually complying and only serving alcohol with food?
I suppose it's really exercising, like I said, due diligence in respect of that. And obviously, if enforcement officers turn up, they'd expect to see everyone who's eating either be with a meal or evidence that they've had a meal. I mean, that's, I suppose, goes without saying. But I suppose going beyond that, I suppose it's hard to say. I mean, if we're talking about offences generally and due diligence in respect of sort of avoiding that, I mean, due diligence is reliance on information given to you by some other person, and that you've then taken reasonable precautions and exercised some diligence to avoid committing the offence. So, you're trying to not do it. So evidence sort of relevant to that is regular auditing, spot checks, evidence of disciplinary action if there have been any breaches, regular supervision, training and regular refresher training for staff in respect of what the restrictions are. And also just having your procedures carefully and clearly documented, and just being sure that your staff understand them and being able to demonstrate that.
Okay, one of the ones that's come up from a lot of people, I guess, as well, is about if you're not currently serving food, what can you do? So can you bring in a street food kitchen? I think somebody just said on the chat, can you work with a takeaway service to deliver to the table, an Uber Eats or whatever? What do you think is allowed?
Yeah, I mean, there's been quite a lot of chat floating around about this, and I think it's actually been confirmed. I've not had anything directly, but I've seen sort of reports, particularly in the press, emanating from government departments, that is okay. I suppose that the point is that the alcohol has to be part of the meal. So the two have to go together. Now, how you arrange that, obviously, depending on how you're going to be set up, will have its own practicalities, I guess. So yes, you can sort of strike up an agreement, a relationship with a food provider, but what you will have to do is ensure that the alcohol is being provided as part of the meal. So how you do that in practice, again, it'll be one for you to figure out depending on your individual circumstances.
Okay, thank you. And that's something that we'll be hopefully working on over the weekend and early next week in trying to link bars together with street food providers where you haven't got it and so on. So we'll be moving that forward. But lots coming through in terms of detail, but we need to move on a bit to live events because there's been a lot of questions around this. Are people still allowed to provide entertainment and charge for it? And under what conditions can live music events and live theatre happen?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the restrictions haven't changed in respect of that from the move to tier 3. So other than, I suppose, the alcohol element. So yes, those venues, you can provide the entertainment, obviously subject to all the COVID secure guidance, the curfew, and the limitations on sort of households. The added element now is the limitation on the service of alcohol, that it has to be with the meal. And so I suppose relevant to those entertainment venues, the alcohol aspect, it goes as part of the meal. It's not with the entertainment or the show. So I would say you can't just have a meal and then carry on drinking for the rest of the performance or the show. You've got to be doing it in line. The alcohol consumption has to be in line with the meal.
And just to dodge back, and it is relevant to this as well, one that's coming up again and again. Clarification on, are cafes and in the circumstance you're saying performance art places, are they still allowed to serve tea, coffee, soft drinks, even snacks on their own, as long as alcohol isn't consumed?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so that's fine. So in your theoretical point, if somebody goes to a performance, has a meal, a dinner theatre in a 1930s way, and has a drink with that meal, when the meal's finished, they can still be sitting there having water, coffee, whatever, watching the rest of the performance. They just can't have alcohol with it. Yep. Okay, yeah. Cool. Presumably, as a theatre, pre-theatre drinks, half-time drinks, interval drinks, after drinks, again, as that's not with main course food, you can't do that.
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. So as far as we're aware, live music venues under this, you can stay open as long as you're following all the other regs?
Yes, yeah. As I said, the restriction on opening, and I suppose it's the use of the word opening, but the wording in the regulation is cease to carry on that business. So you can completely repurpose yourself, and as I said, the premises which must cease to carry on that operation are pubs, bars, or other businesses involving the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises. So for those live music venues, I would say you can carry on without alcohol, or if you're going to provide alcohol, it's got to be served as part of the table meal. But there's no limitation, there's no restriction on, as I said, entertainment venues, other than, like I mentioned at the start, the ones that have been closed since day one, your nightclubs, dance halls, discos, similar premises, or or the other categories.
Okay. I think that picks up a lot of the questions that came through, which were obviously concerns around live music venues preparing to reopen or theatres preparing to reopen. So it's alcohol that is the problem with these, and that's the same around amateur activity as well, except for all the other regulations that are already in place and that we already know about. one that a lot of people have come up with, particularly the hotels, and I've seen coming through. I'll ask the one about marriage proposals in a minute. Are meetings for business still allowed? And there was a huge furor I saw on Twitter yesterday where people were sort of saying, if we say it's for business, then we can all get together, 6 of us at a table, and we can all come from different parts of the country as long as we say it for business, which again is another way of trying to get around things. But what's the definition of a business meeting? What's the definition of what would be allowed for business?
Yeah, so I think the thing with business meetings is that they have to be reasonably necessary. So again, how you define that as operators, I'm not quite sure. I suppose I go back to what I said earlier about the exercising an element of due diligence, and what you've got in place to ensure that, the people who are claiming that, you can be satisfied it legitimately is. So how would you check it's a business meeting and not just a ruse as a social gathering? Obviously, that exception is there to cater for, genuine business meetings, the people who are going to sort of, a lot of self-employed people, freelancers who, will meet up and have these discussions. And, it's quite right, it shouldn't get in the way of that. So, I think the expectation is you as venues, just exercise, that common sense, due diligence into how you're going to, seek to maintain those principles.
So we're talking about being reasonable, or what a reasonable person would expect to see as part of a dinner or a main meal a lot of the time here, aren't we? Okay. Marriage proposals. Can we accommodate marriage proposals?
In what way?
If you had separate households in a private room to do a marriage proposal.
I don't know.
I don't think you think you can under Chair 3, can you? Because you wouldn't be the same households.
I suppose you could be living together and.
Yeah. Okay.
And so yeah, I suppose in that case, if you're from the same household, there's nothing stopping you. But maybe you can't if you're more traditional and don't live together, I guess. You have to go to a park. I think you can do it in a park or a public space.
Yeah, make use of our wonderful public spaces in Manchester. That would be. James asks, and I think we did talk about this at the beginning, but alcohol can be served on its own in room service, can't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Then some more general ones on licensing. Has this affected anything on the premises license?
No, I don't think so. Let me just catch up my notes. No, it's not particularly, to be honest.
Okay.
No.
A lot of people have asked about sort of legal responsibility. So who is the venue legally responsible if groups are found to have misled them around single household or support bubble status?
Again, it's going to be a case on each of its merits. Yes, you do have a responsibility as the business. I take you back to what I said about exercising that due diligence. That's your defence there, and if you can demonstrate that'll stand you in good stead. But equally, members of the public have to take on responsibility for their own actions as well.
Some more detailed questions. If you're a members club, does that affect any of the rules? If you're a private members club, could you still serve alcohol?
I'll have to check that, to be honest, as to whether that is captured. I've not looked into that. I suspect, well, I'll not speculate. I'll come back to you on that point.
Okay, thank you. That would be really useful. And then in terms of the general rules again around numbers of people who are allowed to meet and situations, are outdoor venues allowed to host up to 6 people from multiple households? It's a little bit confusing.
So
no. Okay.
The one of the changes into tier 3 is the single household or support bubble applies to your outdoor areas now as well.
Thank you.
And, if you want, I can go through what a support bubble is.
Yeah, actually, that would be useful as well. So who's allowed in which situation?
So I'll read this out. This is the government's wording, not mine. So it's a close support network between a household with only one adult in the home, which is known as a single adult household, and one other household of any size. So yes, a household with one adult in the home and one other household of any other size. And so once you're in a support bubble, you can think of yourself as being in a single household with people from the other household. So you can have close contact, and obviously you can go to licensed premises together.
Co-working spaces, can people from different households sit and work together, assuming it's sort of necessary? Business meetings, offices effectively working together.
I'll have to sort of
you're going to need to lie down after this.
It's probably not so much a licensing issue that I suppose a co-working space, I guess applying the principles, are you suggesting that people meet in the co-working space and work together?
Yeah, even if they're not eating the entire time they're in the venue. So we've got plenty of cafes that are effectively, offering rentable space and rentable tables for a number of hours, and that's the way they're generating. So you may then, have a number of people coming together, working together. So different households sitting together.
I'll have a look at that separately if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, we've got a lot of other questions coming through, but I think we've done the majority of them. We are making this available afterwards in terms of the recordings. Obviously, if you've got specific questions, we can then try and get answers to those, and we will update with further information coming through. Chris asks, and I think it's a good summation as we get to the end, before we move on to Gareth. Can you just run through, Fraser, which businesses are actually being asked to close at this point?
Sure. Okay, I'll go through the list. So it is, so a pub, bar, or other business involving the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises must cease to carry on unless you're providing the alcohol with a table meal. So you've got that. Then you've got nightclubs, dance halls, discotheques, other premises which open at night and have a dance floor and provide music to dance to, sexual entertainment venues, hostess bars, we have any of those, casinos, betting shops, adult gaming centres, bingo halls, soft play areas and soft play centres.
So where we're looking at live event spaces, as we said earlier, they're continuing to be allowed to open, but if they're actually, the majority of their revenue is going through alcohol, which they can no longer serve unless it's with a meal, they are still allowed to open and they're not being forced to close, are they?
No.
Okay. Which becomes a problem around the funding, which is a very different problem. Gareth, do you want to do a quick summary of what the funding was that came through yesterday?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So obviously, hi everyone. Obviously, Rishi, the Chancellor, kind of announced new packages yesterday. So we're kind of getting to grips with them. A lot of the information regarding various things has still not come out yet. So we are going to be waiting on that. The second it does come, we will get it out to you. Obviously, the headlines kind of really from yesterday and going backwards is, so areas that have been covered under Tier 2, which would include Greater Manchester, will be receiving backdated grants for all venues in hospitality. Now, this will be broke down under for properties with rateable value of £15,000 or under, grants of £934 per month. Properties with a rateable value of 15,000 and below 51 will be granted 1,400 per month. And properties with a rateable value of exactly 51 and over will gain the 2,100 a month. Now, these are backdated and will be paid basically. So we kind of went in, is it 10 weeks around August time? So it'll be backdated from then. So you will get that money, and then we go into the Tier 3. So that the Tier 2 stuff then stops with us. And then we're going to the Tier 3. Now, the Tier 3 that obviously has been quite well written everywhere is if you are closed, the properties with a rateable value of 15 will receive grants of 667 per 2 weeks, so 1,334 per month. Properties with 15 to 51 will get 2,000 a month, and properties of 51 and over 3,000 a month. Now, these the Tier 3 ones will be, I think they're looking to pay these in December, but the Tier 2 ones are looking to pay these as soon as possible, so they will be backdated. So a lot of you will get these. Now, on top of this, for venues that are open, but are obviously struggling, like a lot of you are because trade is down, the government has announced that they are giving a financial package to the local authorities, which the guidance still needs to come out on that about how much that will be. Now, the original talk was going to be around £1,500, but that will be if you are trading, you would get that. However, there's a lot of details still to come out on that, so we will let you know the second we know more. The job support scheme, obviously, now you have the two kind of ones. You have the ones that if you're closed, where the venues get, where your staff will get 67% of, well, the 2/3 of their wages if you are forced to close, or if you do choose to close, you should be eligible for this as well. The scheme will cover businesses that, as a result of restrictions set by one or more of the 4 governments in the UK, are legally required to close. This includes premises restricted to delivery or collection services only. So that means if you are just a takeaway and you've closed and started operating doing the delivery or whatever, then your staff will still be eligible for that. If they're not, then they will have to go through the wider JSS scheme, basically, which is the minimum hours required, which is announced yesterday, which has gone down from 33% down to 20% of what the staff have to do. So that's kind of knocks it down to around 5% for the employer contribution. So that to make sense of that, the government will contribute 61.67% for non-worked hours, capped at 1,541 a month, and you will top up kind of the rest. One thing to just bear in mind, now bear in mind, I've written and we've put on the Cityco website already various fact sheets which go on pages and pages and pages, which you are more than welcome to go and look at. Just one thing before I stop is, which is a bit of a random one, which I actually found in the fine print, is business required to close as a result of a specific workplace outbreak by local public health authorities are not eligible for any of the funding. And that's just one thing to think about. Right, Vaughan, I'll pass it to you, but like I say, everything's kind of on the website. We will send everything out as well.
Okay. I mean, the big question that's coming up an awful lot, and which we don't really know the answer, though we think the way it's going, is if you are a venue that relies on alcohol sales, but you're not being shut, or you're a restaurant that is no longer, the owner's field is viable, and you choose to shut, you're not, we don't think you're going to be eligible for those Tier 3 grants, do we?
Well, that's as it stands. However, some of the MPs, etc., are now starting to say that you will be. So I know there's a lot of venues in the city that want to kind of maybe trial it for a couple of weeks to see if it works, and if you then close, it's that. So I have asked the question, and the second we get the answer, we'll get it out to you over kind of, because there will be grants coming through the local authority, through Manchester City Council, for those venues that are remaining open. but it won't be as much as the ones that are closed. So, but we are just waiting on the fine print. Shall
As
we
soon
say?
as we know, we will let you know. It's something that's that's changing a fair amount, I think, and the details of the furlough schemes and the amount of money that then is available to the local authorities as discretionary grants, of course. That's going to be fairly important for how we move forward. Can we just move on to maybe slightly more positive bit, looking at some of the outside areas that we're going to be working on for the Christmas area. Neil, can you put your video on and your sound on?
How's that? You good?
We've got you by sound, haven't got a video. There we go.
Saying on mute. So I've unmuted it.
Now we can hear you. So if you can take us through guidance and rules around heaters, what venues with outside areas will need to be looking at for heaters?
Okay, certainly. Can everyone hear me clearly? Can you hear me now? Okay, so just to clarify the legal position of the fire safety order, as everyone is a license holder, they should already have a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment, which they will either employ somebody to review or they may review it themselves. So in this case, outside drinking would be a significant finding, so they should review their current fire risk assessment to take account of that, and then within that put in the action plan to make sure that they comply with the fire safety order. Regarding the way that they heat the areas, obviously there are patio heaters which are run by gas, there are electrical heaters, so there are a few types. Without going through all the legislation, I think the common sense approach would apply is that if you're going to use a patio heater, obviously you've got to have some good ventilation and you have to minimize the amount of combustible items which are in that particular vicinity. So for example, you don't want people sitting in a tiny tent with a patio heater right in the middle of them, which is burning, because that of course increases the heat and so on and so forth. What you need is the exhaust to be to atmosphere effectively. It's also important to say that all the heaters, when they're burning, are at their least dangerous, stupid as it sounds, because the liquefied gas is then burning as a gas and then goes to open air. The biggest danger here is cylinders which are not burning, so therefore they are pressurized in the cylinder. So if they're not stored correctly and a fire occurs, then the heat is applied to the exterior of a cylinder. Therefore, there's an expansion of the liquefied gas within the cylinder, which will eventually reach a bursting point, and therefore you have flame impingement onto a liquefied gas, and then you're in explosion territory. So the biggest issue for the fire service is storage during and after. So even if a cylinder runs out of gas, there still will be residual gas in the cylinder. So ideally, those empty cylinders should be removed on the same day, really. You don't particularly need to be storing cylinders in areas where you may have a fire. That makes sense. We have some guidance which I can share with Gareth, because obviously I've got his email address, which is effectively the same guidance that we supply during the Christmas markets, because of course there's predominantly a large number of cylinders used for cooking food, for heating areas, so on and so forth. And within that document is all the advice that everyone should need to be able to keep their premises safe during this particular circumstance. I reiterate, when they're being used, as long as they're not near combustible items, they are probably at their least dangerous. because the explosive limits are not so huge. The real danger here is a storage issue and the chance of a fire taking place when they're not in use.
That's great. Thank you very much, Neil. So should probably have done a better introduction to this. Is for those of you who have got outside areas who are continuing to trade and provide meals and therefore alcohol with meals. We are obviously, and the City Council is working really hard on how we can actually make sure that people can stay warm and stay safe and stay comfortable in those outside areas and making the best use that we can of them. We know that the first avenue that will be investigated obviously is heaters, and that's why Neil was talking about the safety of it and the stuff that you need to think about, particularly in storage, how you're actually getting the gas to those heaters, getting it stored, getting it back out again. Fraser, do you want to talk about the other side of it, which is gazebos and coverage and so on?
Sure. So in respect of the pavement licenses, they were initially granted for a 3-month period. So we're coming up to point in time where those will be running out, and equally you'll be looking to add winter furniture, the likes of heaters and coverings that you probably didn't include first time around when you got your pavement license. So I suppose that the point to make is that your license sets out what furniture, and by furniture it means that all the items that you can put out on the highway and that you're licensed to do so. So we've actually got a guidance document. I'm just waiting for some changes to be made to the council's website, which will include that guidance, but I'll arrange for that to be circulated today as well. There will be some changes to the application process, slightly from first time around. So because of, I suppose, the risks associated with heating devices and covers, canopies, things like that, we are asking for, I suppose, images of any coverings or canopies that you intend to provide, and also, I suppose, more detail on the layout plan to show the use of any heaters that you'll be using. So I suppose in general, obviously we are looking to support you to operate over the winter how you can. What we want to just make sure is that it's done so safely, and it's done so, I suppose, appropriately with regards to the character for the area. We've obviously got some of the road closure areas, so we've got a lot of operators operating their own distinct areas in close proximity and connection to one another. So again, one of the things that we want to do is try and work together in so much as possible so that we can ensure that the neighbouring areas are as set up as complementary to each other as possible. So obviously we've got the group set up, fire service, integral part of that, health and safety, licensing, out of hours team. So, we'll be working with you over the next few weeks in how we get these areas set up and authorised. I'll anticipate the changes to the website hopefully should be made from Monday. So you'll be able to reapply from them. And like I said, I'll get the guidance circulated in the meantime as well. 2 other important points. We're looking to grant licenses this time for 6 months rather than the 3. And the other thing, obviously there was no charge first time around for pavement licenses. And that is still going to be the case. So yes, for your next licenses, again, there will be no charge. And that's been agreed by senior management and politicians together.
Do people have to take in gazebos at night, even on closed off roads, or can they leave them out?
The road closures themselves are only temporary. So yes, they have to be taken away. Now, what we will do is if anybody has a proposal you know, that goes further than that, then I suppose by all means we'll look at it and see what we can do. I think rather than just applying that circumstance, if you can maybe get in touch either through me directly or through Gareth, and we can explore those proposals separately, because there'll be a greater degree of consideration for things like that.
Actually, if it's a lot more permanent solution than a gazebo, obviously they need to talk to you, but equally, if it's a permanent, semi-permanent solution, they're not going to have to be dragging it in necessarily overnight.
Yeah, and I fully get the, the practical implications and why that would be desirable. But yeah, I suppose the difficulty kind of is the legislation set up around it being temporary, it being brought in on an evening, and so that there are other implications that we need to explore, and also, I suppose, the appropriateness in different locations as well.
We'll just finish up in a second, but a couple of final questions. Alcohol as takeaway. Can you serve alcohol from the bar to takeaway? Does it need to be in sealed containers?
So, just generally, yes. I mean, it's not a legal requirement in a lot of cases, but what we are saying, our position would be, yes, it should be sealed containers. If you're doing it for takeaway, we have the public space protection order in place in the city centre, and what that does is it creates an offence for people who are consuming alcohol in public spaces to not give it up. We really want to avoid circumstances like that and having to challenge people, having to enforce things like that. And I suppose we know from the first lockdown, we did have issues resulting from things like that. And, I think everyone's got enough on the plate as we go on. So, yes, I think, if we're talking about alcohol to take away, we would expect sealed containers.
It's come up a couple of times, but are disabled guests, is there any different rules for them? If they can't feed themselves, are they exempt from the purchasing a meal with alcohol type thing?
I don't know, to be honest. I'll have to have a look at that.
Which legislation trumps which legislation there, I think, in terms of access?
Yeah, I've a feeling I might have seen somewhere in the regulations an exemption around disabilities and I suppose who can attend the premises, but I'll double check the regulations to see what it says.
That's cool. Thank you.
It makes sense too.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Fraser. Thank you for that, Neil. Kate, did you want to add anything from your side? And then I'll finish with Pat.
Yeah, just very quickly, thank you, Vaughan. Just on behalf of the council, we are doing our very best. We don't want to be punitive, but we are looking for common sense, and that's what our enforcement officers and compliance officers will be looking for when they come in. We can't expect businesses to, do some in-depth interrogation of their customers, but they have to reasonably satisfy themselves. And so we'll be trying to use common sense as well and support the sectors as much as we can.
Thank you, Kate. Pat.
Well, thank you to CityCo for organising it, and three excellent speakers, Neil and Gareth and Fraser. Fantastic team of people to help everybody in Manchester. And thanks, as Kate said, to everyone on the call. Our overall approach is going to be from the council, working with Greater Manchester Police, is that it's a given that we have to abide by the regulations, but there will be no crackdown, there will be no raids. If we get complaints, we will work with you closely to resolve problems. We want to keep everybody in business, and so we're not here to crack any big stick about this. Everyone has to obey the regulations, the law. And we will work, if we get any complaints, we will talk to you and see if we can resolve them. And just finally, I'd like to say that as a council, we're trying to get out of this in 4 weeks' time. There's a review in 4 weeks' time, and if Manchester pulls together, we are determined to get out of this as quickly as possible. The government is making a lot of this up as they go along. Liverpool entered into Tier 3 way before Manchester. The money is not being given to Liverpool for business support. There's been no guidance or criteria for Liverpool. So you're going to have to bear with us in terms of what we're getting from government at the moment. It is make it up on a daily basis. But we're here to support all our great businesses in Manchester, and we will not be cracking down on anybody. And let's all try and get out of this in 4 weeks' time.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you to everyone for joining us. A few final things, just to echo that from Pat. I've heard very strong messages from Richard Leese as the head of the City Council about support for business. Not quite doing anything that it takes, because you've got to stay within the regulations, but helping businesses as much as they can to keep going in what is a really, really difficult situation at the moment. A few things that we're going to be doing. I know we did actually have Bill from Pannoni's on the call, so apologies, Bill, for not coming to you for any of the regulations. I do think that we're going to be, as we get more detail about the regulations coming through, we're going to be doing another one of these fairly soon, I would think. So we can look at some of the legals and some of the details, and hopefully some more information around the funding and how the funding is going to work. One of the things that Gareth is going to be working on, though he only half knows, is trying to come back to you over the next few days with either pop-up street kitchens or delivery services that can help your business, if it is a wet-led business, provide food as well, so that you can stay open. But obviously it is a decision for you whether that's going to work, whether that's not going to work, how it's going to work. So we want to try and do something positive as well. So we will be doing that over the next few days. Finally, a request from me is, if any of you are following the Marcus Rashford campaign, and as restaurants or cafes are going to be providing food for kids over the next week or so, can you just drop us a line so that we can collate it and then do some press release stuff about it, because it's a wonderful initiative and I know a huge number of places are doing it. It would be good to bring it all together. Thank you for joining us. I wish it would be in slightly happier terms than it currently is, but you can be assured that we, and particularly Gareth from our side, are going to be doing everything we can to keep you open, keep you operating, and keep the city centre a success. Thank you very much.